Yeah. So for me, the secret of success is knowing like what is you're good at and staying inside of your lane. Right.
Mm.
The issue with that kind of advice, though, is that if you take that too strictly, then you actually never grow at all. Right. So the things as is about saying like, how do you grow correctly? Like, what is the appreciable level of risk that you're willing to take to be able to grow?
This is the real estate investing experience. We get it. Real estate can be rough sometimes, and that's why we bring in the experts to talk about the experiences you won't hear anywhere else. With your hosts, John Cohen and Chris Grinzik.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Investing Experience. I'm your host, Chris Grenzig. With me, as always, is John Cohen. How's it going, bud?
I'm good. Hanging in there.
Yeah, good stuff. I think we're a little strapped for time, so forget any introduction from us. We're going to jump right into it. So I'm super happy to have Scott Smith on today. It's going to give us a ton of good information. I'm excited to pick his brain and learn more about what he's doing. We were talking about some interesting stuff before the call, so pretty confident that this is going to be a good episode. So Scott, thanks for joining us, bud.
Hey, Chris. Great to be here with you.
Yeah. So you want to kick things off, just tell everybody a little bit about you, your background, and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So, of course, my name is Scott Royal Smith. I'm an asset protection attorney and real estate investor. I actually got my start in real estate while I was in law school. I bought a transmission and auto repair shop and flipped it to graduate from law school without any debt. And then I worked in litigation, suing insurance companies, because come to find out that insurance companies love collecting premiums and they don't like paying out, right? Especially when the claims get big. And the whole time while I was working as a litigator, I kept investing in real estate until I was making more money doing real estate than I was being a lawyer. So I quit being a lawyer and I went into real estate full time and started to scale up, probably as a lot of your audience is in this kind of position where you start wondering about like, what do I need to start doing for tax, and what do I need to start doing for estate planning? What do I need to start doing for asset protection in case I get sued? And is there any way to hide my assets so way people can't find out how much I own? And I had to do that for myself. And eventually people started to ask me like, hey, Scott, what are you doing? And I would tell them, and they say, well, can you help me do that? And my response was, well, sure. Yeah. Happy to help you. And then I at the end of the day, I kind of accidentally started a law firm out of that. So now we're a team of about 30 people at Royal Legal that help real estate investors all over the country in every type of asset class with a number of attorneys and paralegals. And we're on a mission to help people get to financial freedom and using the best practices that are tried and true from the over 2,000 investors all over the country that we work with.
Awesome. I love it. So what type of real estate were you doing? Give us a little bit of background on like your personal journey, and then, we can hop more into, the legal side of things, which, every investor always has questions about. You always seem to get either conflicting information or just nobody really knows. So I'm just curious what you did personally first.
Yeah, so I started where most people did, right? Which is in scaling into single family homes. I guess my first building technically was a commercial building and a business that I had bought. And I don't recommend anybody doing that. Like that was insane, to try to have that kind of a learning curve. But after that, I was in single family homes and did some, 1 to 4 units and some smaller kinds of apartment complexes. And then after, the law firm started kicking off and I started getting more national recognition from being on Bigger Pockets podcast, other big podcasts, but years ago, that's when I started getting into just about everything, right? Because I would get all this deal flow in from all of my clients. I would just say, hey, can you look at this or that, the other thing? So it was in land and notes and commercial and larger apartment complexes, different syndication deals. And that's where I really started to broaden out a lot more. But my primary focus was in the single family homes. And what really got me going into really being concerned about asset protection was a friend of mine who lost over $3 million from a single lawsuit. And he had everything in his personal name and he had tons of insurance. But what he didn't realize was that insurance only protected him from simple accidents on his property. He thought it protected him from everything. And he had a breach of contract claim from another deal that he went into. And they sued him and they took over $3 million. And all he really had to do was some basic things with asset protection to prevent that kind of risk. But the problem was that he erroneously believed that the insurance was enough to protect him from there. And now it's part of my mission into scaling into real estate from that experience is how to make sure that as people we move forward down that journey, that we're not going to have the major setbacks.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear you 100%. I do want to get into all that. I'm just curious because you touched on something that's interesting that we've talked about a lot, which is, as you start getting more into the real estate world, you get exposed to a ton of stuff. As you said, you had a ton of clients bringing you a multitude of different types of investment vehicles, probably across the country, potentially in other countries. And, for us, through networking and doing the podcast, we're exposed to the same types of things. How have you, or maybe you haven't, how have you been able to, not get shiny object syndrome, or, how have you been able to stay focused on something and not feel like you've got all these things assaulting you and, kind of staying successful?
Yeah. So for me, the secret of success is knowing like what is you're good at and staying inside of your lane. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The issue with that kind of advice, though, is that if you take that too strictly, then you actually never grow at all. Right. So the things is about saying like, how do you grow correctly? Like, what is the appreciable level of risk that you're willing to take to be able to grow? And that's actually something we talk a lot about in my show, the Real Estate Nerds podcast, where we look at people's best and worst deals and what they did or didn't do that led them there. And that's what gave me these kinds of insights from a broad spectrum of real estate investors. And it's one that I subscribe to myself. So what I always tell people is saying like, well, you're free to do any deal that you want to do, right? As long as you meet like a couple of key conditions that are there, right? One is that you're going into the deal and that you have somebody else that's putting money into the deal that you trust, that is good, and that they're actually going to be putting in cash into that deal like with you at the same time, right? Somebody else that's more experienced than you go into the deal. Alternatively, what you could also have is like a mentor of somebody else that's helping you underwrite that deal. And the third thing is if you're doing something new, you need to be prepared to have a near total loss of that capital to feel comfortable with it. So what that means is you just be really smart with how you're going to be placing bets. So like in the stock market, right, they talk about paper trading, which is how you like trade, but you're not actually putting in money, but you're just keeping track of your wins and losses there, right? And real estate investing, that might be like instead of putting in, $500,000 or $250,000 of your own money into a deal, maybe find a deal that's similar to that and put in, $30,000 with a syndicator, $50,000 with a syndicator. So you can actually get a feel for like, how does that deal actually work, right? Before you jump in to the deep end.
Yeah, I love that. I was having a very similar conversation with my buddy Austin, and we were talking with somebody who is like a wholesaler and an agent in the Midwest, and he was talking about going into Texas and moving into a new market. And John and I talk about this a lot of how, when you go into a new market and you're looking at deals, there's people that have been in that market for years and have been doing exactly what you're looking to do. If you don't think they've seen this deal before you as a new person in that area, you're completely fooling yourself. So you've got to understand that getting into a market and having that insider knowledge is going to take time, potentially losses, or, getting with somebody else's experience, which are all the areas you just covered. And there's nothing wrong with that, but just understanding that, hey, if I'm going to get into an area, sometimes I'm going to have to pay market, or I'm going to have to pay a slight premium. And then over time, you're just going to have a way better understanding of what's going on. Down in Florida and in Columbus, it took that first deal to really open up those doors for us to find some of the great deals we bought. But, it took a little bit of somebody with experience or, buying the first deal, which may or may not have been the best deal in the world to kind of get into that area. So I think it's really interesting the way you broke it down of all those different areas. And, sometimes just, that first deal maybe doesn't make you a ton of money, but if it gets your foot in the door and it leads to, 10x deals that do make you a ton of money, sometimes, that's the trade-off you kind of give.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really been true in my case, right? So like, I've done deals that might be similar to yours, Chris, like you did down in Florida, where it's like I really knew this broker could really bring me a lot of really great deals if they really wanted to. Mm-hmm. I knew they had that kind of deal flow from other people I had talked to. But they weren't sending me their great deals. Mm-hmm. They're sending other people the great deals, and they weren't sending me the great deals. So I was like, well, what the heck do I have to do, into this? So what I ended up doing is I ended up buying one of the deals that weren't as good, right? And use that as a way to like prove to the broker that says like, no, I'm actually like a really serious buyer, right? Mm-hmm. And realizing that, the first thing I did actually when I started out that was most powerful for me is I started seeking out who who are the people that had what I wanted and how could I emulate what they did, right? So who are the guys that were building big real estate portfolios, accomplishing financial freedom by getting their cash flow to meet their expenses? And then how did they go about, doing that? And the one thing I found over and over again is that these guys didn't think in terms of like 1 year. They thought in the minimum of terms of 3 to 5 years of everything that they were doing. So that's when before I said, I'm not going to do a deal that I know isn't going to get me the best ROI. And then I started realizing that it's like, no, these are like investments. And it's an investments that the richer guys were actually more fair with the money than everybody else. That they were happy to give more away to make sure that they had a solid relationship with somebody that they knew over time could bring them a ton of value. And that was a really big shift for me when I was like, oh, the business really isn't about like the dollars and cents in any one particular deal. It's about what is like a pipeline of a relationship for you. And then knowing that there's only a few key relationships you really need to get to where you need to go. There's a ton of people out there, but there's only a few, like a handful, I'd say even less than 5 relationships you really need to really get to financial freedom, to really get to those endpoints that we all think are like the crown jewel of like where we want to go.
Mm-hmm. That nobody talks about that component of it, right? It's not, there's something to be said about overpaying to prove, or it's not the best deal you do to have the domino fall that, okay, he's a serious buyer in my market. I talk about it all the time. You could go that route. The other route is obviously investing with a professional in that area and then using that as you parlay that into, I'm an expert in the area, or I've invested in the area. I own a 200 unit or whatever it is. But there's something to be said about that, because you're right. There are not that many people that are transacting or brokers or deal finders. There's a smaller part of that. So if you could build a pipeline, a relationship that's going to feed you deals over the next 3, 5, 10 years, it's like a loss leader in a supermarket. People, they lose money on an item because it brings in people to buy a lot of other items. So I'm not saying you should go buy a deal and lose $100,000, but if you have to buy something and it's marginal, but it's a place you really want to invest in and the future looks a lot brighter, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a bad approach.
Yeah. I mean, that was, when I was buying this 16 unit for myself, I was talking with the broker for probably 15, 20, 30 minutes. And it was only towards the end of the conversation, he kind of, we hadn't really talked a bunch. He was a partner at a larger company that sold us a couple deals, but we never really interacted, and he went off on his own. And it was only at the end, he's like, oh, you kind of actually know what's going on. Cause we talked about like, I don't know, probably 10, 15 deals that we're selling or in the process of selling or going back and forth and who bought what and doing this, that. And he's like, oh shit, you kind of actually know. And then that's when he said like, hey, I may actually have a deal for you. Like there was a guy who was thinking about selling, then COVID hit, like I can reach out if you think it's of interest. And I said, sure, like see if he's still willing to sell. Let's see what happens. But it took a 30-minute conversation. And for him to be like, okay, you're not just some jerk off looking to buy a deal with a little bit of money. You kind of actually know what you're talking about. We'll see if that's actually true or not. But, it took a little bit of time for him to realize it. And it wasn't just a 30-minute call. It was a 30-minute call plus 3.5, 4 years worth of doing business in that area for it to only happen in a 30-minute call. So it happens all the time.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, I think that's 100% true, right? It's like a lot of people only see the amount of work that goes into like be successful at like the very end of it, right? They see like, oh, I was able to lock down this 200 unit place and it only took me 30 minutes to do it. And I was going to be like, yeah, that's a whole bunch of BS right there, because like success doesn't come that easy, like when the lotto comes that easy, but that's why not a lot of people win it, like the reality of like what it takes to be like actually have sustained success, safe success, is that it takes like more time and it takes more effort into it. But I think that the other side of the conversation that I think is, a lot of people are like, man, I want the success and I want it right now. Right. But what's more exciting for me is like, what's the guaranteed path to success? Right. Like I can work my ass off for like 5 years, 7 years, if I know what the end goal is going to be. That's like, yo, by that time, like I'm out of the game, like I don't have to do anything I don't want to do after that. Right. And I know that path is like a really secured path, for me to get there, and that it's not like playing the lottery. And it's a lot like what you were talking about, right? Because it's like, you had to know what is the right work to put in to make that thing happen in that moment, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's where a lot of people miss it. But the people that I work with that are consistently successful, that are able to build up that, 1, 5, 10 million net worth, into it, is a super repeatable process. just like for you guys, I'm sure it's super repeatable. Like, how do you find your deals? How do you underwrite them? How do you know what to close on? Eventually, like, the secrets to success become these just mechanical habits, but they just take time to be able to develop.
Yeah, I mean, the beginning steps of us figuring out if it's a deal that we want to buy or not takes a 5-minute conversation about whether we should spend more time on it. I mean, there's so many deals that we get sent. We're just like, this is never going to make sense just based on like the rent and the price per door, or like the area and what they're asking for, because we just know what we can and can't do and how we're roughly going to operate it. And yeah, every deal has little things of, I don't know right away if it needs new roofs or not, or if the plumbing's shot or not, but I know very quickly if this is worth spending my time or not. And more often than not, it's, we're not going to spend our time here. But that didn't just happen overnight. It took underwriting and looking and buying multiple deals over the past 4.5 years to get to that space. And for me, it was learning from John and Don, who were doing it even longer. So it's definitely that time and that experience that happens. And you brought up a really interesting point that I think it coincides really well, as we've started talking with more institutional equity, private equity, family offices. That relationship is always so fundamental in the beginning conversations for them, because it's the same thing. It's always, hey, let's get through the first deal. It's going to suck. It's going to be, a lot of headaches, a lot of paperwork, whatever. But we're not just looking at it on a one-off basis. We're looking for a pipeline of, 10, 15, 20 deals over the next 5, 10, 15 years. We just don't want to be one and done. We want to spend that time up front, create that relationship, know that, hey, you're going to have the money, we're going to have the deals, and we're just going to be able to do this for the long haul. And I think that's really interesting, because these are obviously, these are companies with, hundreds of millions of dollars, even potentially more. That mindset, I think, is critical to why they're successful.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it also helps a lot with, what you guys have is like a pretty deep bench, right? Of a high levels of experience, right? That allows you to be able to navigate some of those paths. And the questions that I get a lot of the times, or I think are a really good question for people to ponder about, is like, who are the types of professionals or other people that you need to bring into your circle to be able to help accelerate your path through it, right? Because we can either like learn. I tell people all the time that it's like, hey, I'm an attorney and probably one of the best when it comes into like this space, right? And it's only because it's the only thing I focus on, and I've been doing it for years, and it's with a really small group of people called real estate investors, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really tough to beat me at that game, because I got it like so deep into it. But I had to learn everything on my own, and then now like people hire me, it just accelerates like years of learning curve, right? But anybody could learn what I learned. Right. Anybody could go out there and like read the books, talk to the attorneys, the CPAs, and like figure out the same thing like from the ground up. And I'm wondering about like in y'all's field, is it when you're looking at people that are entering into that space, is it typical for you guys to consider of like what types of professionals do we need, and how do you guys think through those types of issues about like who is the most critical people to be on the team to accelerate our path forward?
Yeah, I mean, I literally just did a talk for some students at MIT, and like there was like how to evaluate a deal and how to buy your first deal. And like the first slide was the overview, and then the second slide was building your team. So, I mean, having people in place to, support that deal is hugely important. And you touched on a few of them, the attorneys, the CPAs, but you have property management, you have your insurance, your debt provider, your broker agent who's going to find you the deal. I mean, there's a bunch of people that go into it, and, wherever you steer it, there's different team members or more or less, depending upon how you do it. But yeah, those team members are, hugely critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I to that point, there's nothing going in blind is horrible, right? If you're from our position, just what we do, I have a ton of people ask me questions, who do you use for an attorney, or who's a good litigator, or whatever. Who do you use for accounting, and so on and so forth. Having a really good support staff behind you makes not only referrals, but makes business a lot easier, knowing then that you're going into the deal and everything's taken care of. And I'm not saying, you give them all control and you do nothing, but knowing that you have the best guy that you could either work with, like working with, whatever the reason why he is on your team is the most important thing these deals work. If they work on paper, that's great. But you put the wrong person in a position of power, you mess the entire thing up really quickly. So you got to have the people in your corner that are going to bat for you, or that at least set you up the right way. So it makes a ton of sense, and it's super important to make sure you have those good relationships.
So what was it as you were kind of going through that process of buying stuff and looking at it that you started really heavily looking at like the protection side of things? Because I know when we talk to a lot of people, it's always the upside they look at. And obviously you were either equally focused or more focused on kind of the downside, which I think is what people should be looking at. But like, why was that?
Well, it really happened because of that friend of mine who lost over $3 million from a single lawsuit, right?
Gotcha.
He was a super successful guy, right? He thought he was doing all of the right things, and then he gets popped with something that crippled him, right? Financially. I mean, it took him, that took him years and years and years and years and years to be able to build, right? And then all of a sudden it gets stripped away. I mean, lawsuits in this country, right? I mean, people can sue you for anything. They'll always lie about like whatever it is, and they can sue you for any amount, right? And it doesn't matter how honest you are, right? And I think a lot of people walk around with like this idea of thinking like everything is fine, right? But because it is fine for most people, right? But that's not the risk that we should really be worried about. We should be worried about like, what are the risks of the things that can set me back from getting to like where I'm getting at to in 5 or 10 years. And that's not just playing offense. That means you're also playing really good defense. You're playing really good defense against against lawsuit protection. You're playing by having insurance, by having LLCs, by having the appropriate trusts in place. And you can get these things all put together, it's not, the things that used to cost people $25,000, $30,000, you can get put together for less than $5,000 now. Right. And in that vein, and it's also playing really good defense on your taxes and playing really good defense on your estate planning to know that all the things you're building are being going to be used for your family, or being able to be used for the things that you care about after you go. Because it's not offense that gives you the predictability of how to get to financial freedom. It's your defense. You can actually have not very amazing offense as long as you have really great defense, and you're still going to win, right? On a predictable way. It's just not going to be sexy, but you're going to win. Like the formula is there. The math pencils out every single time, but you're never going to be that guy around the group that's like, yeah, you're never going to believe that 30% return that I made on this one deal, right? Typically the guys that are bragging about that kind of stuff are never the great guys. The guys that are the really, really great guys really focus on process, predictability, and like ways that they can almost have a crystal ball of like what's going to work and what's not going to work. And who are the great people that they actually need to bring on the team. They almost never talk about the types of returns that they're making, because that's not their pride point. Their pride point is in all of the other things that goes into how do you make a great business.
Yeah, those systems and processes are super important. That's why we were talking before the show, and you're like, what do you focus on? What do you like to do? And I said, we don't want to be, we didn't want to be the show that's like, oh, tell me about your first deal, and it's, I made a 400 IRR. It's like that gets old, and I don't think that's valuable or important or whatever. And I think it's more important about like how you conduct business, how you go about it, how you build stuff up, how you do it for the long term, because anybody can hit a home run, right? You do this long enough, you buy enough deals, you kind of just step in shit. And I don't want to say get lucky, but you get lucky a little bit, it happens. But the people that are in it for super long, build their capital up, do it right, those are the people that I think should be emulated and looked up to and trying to replicate in your own stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I'm always looking for like what are like the signs of success from other people, and then that people that have what I want, and then how can I emulate them, for myself. When we talk about like what makes like a great life, right? Which is what I think we're all trying to get at from being real estate investors. Like ultimately we're like, okay, we want to solve this wealth component, which is just actually a small part of what it actually takes to make a great life, right? And so if we looked at it, say, it's like, what does it take to make a great life? That's actually itself like almost like business decisions, because you're having to make a decision around what's going to happen with my wealth creation and what that part of my life is going to look like, that then allows me to go explore all the other areas of my life and be completely fulfilled in those areas and have the time and energy and space to do it. What that actually means, though, is you actually need high levels of strategy and predictability of what happens with your wealth and what happens with your money. Because I think we've all seen the people that get it wrong, and that their like business consumes their life, right? Or that their business goes down and then they jump off of a 70-story building. Like those guys didn't get it right. They didn't figure it out. They had it wrong. about like what the right way to go about this is. Right. And so I think if we actually look to the people that have the lifestyles that we want, that have built the families that they want, that have the fun and adventure in life that they're looking for, and that happen to have the businesses and the wealth, and they're doing all of those things together, those are the people that really have it figured out, because they know about like what are the systems and processes, the approach, the methodology, the mindset that allows you to achieve those things. And perhaps we can learn from studying those people about what's predictable between them. Well, what are the values that actually guide those people and the thought processes that really lead to those results?
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people confuse with, call it financial freedom or financial independence. It's not about, making a fuck ton of money. It's about literally being free or independent to do whatever you want to do. Like, it seems like such an arbitrary thing, but it's been really interesting for me to watch both my parents as they've retired or partially retired. And it's literally just kind of deciding to do whatever you want, whether that's, staying home and doing nothing, or whether it's, going across the country on a whim, or going out to dinner with somebody or lunch with somebody. It seems so contrarian that, you don't have a job and you just do whatever. And like you said, it's really just the platform to do whatever you want with the rest of your life. And it's that planning and strategy that goes behind it, where, there's a really great book called Quitting Like a Millionaire. The couple lives on $40,000 a year to go travel the world. And that's fantastic. But if you want to have a large family and support that family and maybe give back donations to different causes, you're probably not going to do that on $40,000 in the US. You're probably going to need more. So you got to plan for that accordingly. And I think it's super important how you're saying that the planning of the wealth and the financial freedom and the independence is important to understand what you want to achieve in the rest of your life to kind of set you up for that. And I think too many people just see it as, oh, I'm going to build up a ton of money and do what I want. And they get so focused on making the money or building the business or just having wealth that they don't think about the rest of it. And I think that's where a lot of those problems occur.
Yeah, I mean, I see it occur, over and over and over again, right? A lot of the guys that a lot of the investors that come in, that I'll work with, that, on an occasional basis, I'll work with people one-on-one now in terms of doing some coaching. And so it has to be just like the exceptional kind of candidate for me to say that I'm willing to work with them. Personally, I have a team of attorneys and paralegals that help the average person, off the street, or average investor. But what I find time and time again is like people actually don't know what their goals need to be. Right. So it's even at the very basics of some of these guys that'll come in, like we had somebody who's an executive with Snapchat that I've been talking to about like his path to financial freedom. The guy makes over $1 million a year between stock options and whatnot, working for Snapchat. Right. And he was going through about like what his investments needed to be able to hit like his financial freedom goals with it. Right. And I was like, well, what are your actual KPIs? Like, what are your numbers here? What are like your true expenses look like? What's your return on portfolio? Basically, it's all of the questions that we have on our financial freedom one sheet calculator on our royallegalsolutions.com website. And what we find from that is that people didn't actually need to hit the goals that were super hard to hit. You didn't need to hit a 22% return. You actually only needed to hit a 13% return. And at a 13% return, now we're looking at assets that are actually really safe and achievable, right? Whereas a 22% return, we're looking at stuff that's really risky, maybe really difficult to get into, right? And so you can take years. I mean, you're talking about like years of your life as a matter of difference by being able to just have a few strategic conversations with the right people. And that's where I think like what John was saying earlier, it's like, it's your team, it's your people, it's the few people in your life that are super high quality are the ones that drive your thinking in ways that make all the biggest difference to you. And what I'm an advocate for is making sure that the progress you make, that you never had a backstep. And that's why I care about asset protection and estate planning and tax, is because it's the back steps in life are the ones that really set you back, right? It's not the steady uphill climb. You can do that for a long time and feel great, and life is amazing. When life really sucks is divorce, major lawsuits that threaten your entire financial future, right? Like those are things that you have to make sure that you protect your downside risk on, because they're so crippling, just as for you as a person, as well as for your finances. And I mean, that's just kind of the holistic way that I look at both of those things,
So I have a question to get more into, the nitty gritty, right? A lot of people listening, whether they're, billionaires or, they're just starting, is there a threshold where you say, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but you're not there yet. But on the flip side, is there someone that has a ton of money that can like unwind what he did? Or is it better to start with nothing and set it up properly out of the box, or either one?
Yeah, you can really do either, right? So we have some people that come in and say, hey, Scott, I own everything in my personal name. I know that's the worst way I should be owning everything, and I just need help. I've been looking at things and I don't know the right way to go, right? That's probably our most typical type of person that we help is seeing, hey, there's tons of information out here. It looks like it conflicts with each other and I'm having trouble putting all the puzzle pieces together, right? For those people, there's always a great place to start, which is just getting one LLC up. Right? Even if you don't even own many assets at all and you're just trying to start a business, right? I'd say just having an LLC is important because what that LLC does is separate you from any business dealing that you're doing. So if there's a lawsuit that happens with it, they have to sue the LLC. They can't sue you, which protects your credit score. And you have to protect your credit score to get assets. So your first LLC should really be about personal protection. And then you should always get a second LLC, completely separate LLC, to be an anonymous asset holding company. So that should hold like your cash, your stocks, any real estate that you own. Everything should be in that separate asset holding company. Rich people don't own things, right? They have companies that own things. And at the end of the day, with just at least a 2-company structure, what you would have is one company that protects you personally from any lawsuits because that's how you're doing business, and a completely separate company that's your asset holding company that owns everything that you own. So that means like if you get into a car accident or anything, a business deal goes sideways, anything like that, they can't take your wealth, right? They can try to hurt you, but you have high levels of protection around you. And what we've seen time and time again is that if you do all of the asset protection pieces proactively, you can get lawsuits, like 6-figure lawsuits, dropped completely, because the castle of protection is so high, right? People don't want to go after somebody they have to fight through that many layers of protection. And you can do that in the same types of protection that billionaires were the only people that had. And now the average real estate investor can put them in place too, and then build on them over time. So you can actually start at a really low level, right? With just a single LLC, and then over time add in the complexity of, series LLCs, irrevocable trust, land trust, et cetera, to be able to build in as you grow.
That's awesome.
Is there, when you start getting into this, do you ever have clients that come to you and say like, hey, I've had this stuff, and you look and you're like, is there just too much, or is there never really a case where, obviously if you had, 10 layers of protection for one deal, probably too much, but I would assume most people don't have that. But do you often get the case of people that do too much?
No, actually, almost everybody makes the exact same decisions at the end of the day. Like, so I've gone through and like in years ago, right? So what I was doing is I was presenting to everybody, like, here's all the different options you could do. And then like 95+% of the people were all deciding on the same option when they're in the same kind of scenario. So the thing that we're experts at is taking my knowledge from consulting with so many real estate investors over the years and distilling it down to say like, hey, you're in this kind of situation and here's what your goals are. This is exactly what you need to go do. This is what it looks like at the different milestones in your path that we've seen from working with people that had the same objectives and the same kind of similarly situated type of people. And here's the path that they go down, right? So in a lot of senses, it's not cookie cutter in the sense that everybody ends up with the same solution, but everybody ends up with the same solution that's in the exact same scenario and wants the same thing. Because there's actually, for that person trying to achieve that goal, there is the one right way to do it, right? That it comes into it. So that's what we work off of. And those are almost always very cost sensitive, strategic types of money deployment to be able to achieve those scenarios. It's very uncommon that people really want paranoid levels of protection, right? That cost, $30,000+, because honestly, it's just, for most people, it's just not needed, right? They're just not that concerned about it, but they want to make sure that they're doing the right things, right? That I've crossed all my I's, dotted all my T's, and I'm doing all the right things. I have a professional that's looking my back, making sure that I'm doing it right. And from there, they feel great. And that's where we feel good. It's like, cool, we're at that value point.
Gotcha. So just a question. So I understand, I think I know the answer, but I want to clarify. Is your company just like I don't want to say a normal, but like any other attorney, but you specialize in asset protection, or are you a supplement to what, normal people use to, for their attorney and contracts and stuff?
Yeah. So where we fall into it is that we won't do anything that says we have to go appear in a court for you, like in any particular state or county, right? For doing an eviction or anything like that, because we just don't have attorneys in every county, right?
Mm-hmm.
It goes with it, right? So that's the limit of what we don't do into it. But then everything else, we can do it all in a one-stop shop, right? And I think that makes us pretty unique with the ability to do that. Now, that doesn't mean people use us for everything, but it does mean that we have the capability if they want to be able to use us. And so in some scenarios, it makes sense to use local counsel, especially if it's, let's say you're, buying an apartment complex and you want to put together your offering memorandum for people, and all the investors are there locally to you, and all of them like want to go into somebody's office instead of a Zoom call to go sit down, and they want that personal touch and feel like some people do. That's face to face. So I say, well, great. Well, then we're probably not the right fit for you, right? So it really, it really depends like on a case by case basis of what people are going to be interested in. But where we found value for everybody is in the strategic conversations. Whether they decide to actually ultimately have us do everything for us or a smaller amount of things for us, every single person that we've worked with has said that we have 100% response rate on our surveys of saying like, I found our conversations to be valuable, and to help guide me strategically in what I need to do next.
Yeah, I know that's been huge for me, because I know it was interesting. You touched on the tax side earlier, and it's something I've experienced where for 2019, I switched to a friend of mine who specializes in real estate, and they do a lot of strategy stuff. And I've definitely paid a premium, and definitely more than I paid prior. But my, taxable income from 2018 to 2019, I don't know, went up like, 70, 80%, and in theory should have paid more taxes. And I actually paid a good amount less in 2019 versus 2018. And I was surprised at the end and happy, but I think it's, there's a lot of value in people that can provide strategy, see what you're trying to accomplish, work with you along the way, even if there's some sort of premium attached to it. Not that I'm saying you guys are a premium by any means to other attorneys out there, but I think it's money. For me, it was very visceral to see that it was money well spent in an area. I was like, is it really worth it? Is it not worth it? And I said, let me see how it goes, because if it works, great. If not, I'll figure it out another way. And it really worked very well. And that strategy along the way also just made me feel very comfortable. And like you said, provided a ton of value for that person. So I can see why it's the same for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, to speak to that point, right? So where we find ourselves is like, we're always, of course, we're more expensive than somebody that's like LegalZoom, right? That's like, hey, we're going to click and just give you some documents and like, good luck, you're on your own, right? Sure. And how we operate is that we do the strategic planning, we help with the setup, and then we have like a really small monthly membership that allows us to be able to provide like unlimited support for people for any of the questions that they have about anything they've set up with us or what they need to be doing with it operationally. And then we also do like a twice yearly checkup with them to ensure that they're running things correctly. And on the other further on that spectrum, that would be like a personal attorney that you have like in-house, like you have in-house counsel of somebody that you've actually employed, and you pay $150,000 to $200,000 a year to help advise you on all of the issues, right, that come in with it. What we found is that local attorneys just aren't specialized enough. Like they actually typically have to do so much to be able to keep their doors open with different kinds of business that they're really not able to drill down into the nitty gritty of how do all of the puzzle pieces fit together. They'll understand one piece of the puzzle, but they don't understand all of the other pieces of puzzles and how they have to link together synergistically to actually produce wealth, because they're just an attorney. They don't understand like all of the tax implications, investment implications, financial projections, the financing that has to happen and how that relates to the kinds of tax saving strategies that you want to use. And because we focus on such a small area, it puts us into a really elite category where we're really like, our competitors aren't really local attorneys. It's really like guys like Anderson Advisors or assetprotectionplanners.com, like these very, very specific, like niche people that have been in the business for 20, 25 years working with real estate investors and look at just those issues in a super deep way.
Gotcha. Awesome. I think that's a really great place to wrap up. I think this was This is awesome. Got a ton of value out of it. Definitely learned some stuff. And I think we hit on some good points. Scott, thanks so much for coming on. If people want to learn more about you, follow you, get in touch with you, where can they do all that?
Yeah, best place to do that is royallegalsolutions.com. You can click the banner at the top of the page that says, get a price or take the quiz. That quiz is actually the best resource that we have to be able to collect the most important information and be able to have an intelligible conversation, our very first conversation. So all you have to do is go to royallegalsolutions.com, click the get a price or take a quiz at the top of the page, fill out that quiz, and then we pair you with an advisor to start having those conversations and introducing you to the tools that we use to help give you some more strategic look about how you can grow to financial freedom in the future, and from there maybe it makes sense for us to do business and partner together, and maybe it doesn't. But one thing that we pride ourselves on is that every single person that contacts us, we're able to give a lot of strategic value to without ever collecting a dollar from. So it's just royallegalsolutions.com and then taking the quiz there on the website.
Awesome. Guys,
I can say that I was doing it, bro, while I was on that other call before we started filming. I started playing around with it just to get a kit. And I think it's super easy. It's something everyone should give a shot to, and give it a shot. I think the website, I know I heard you guys talk, and I think it's a really nice website. And, it definitely gets to the point, and I think it'll help any listener to at least give it a shot. Like you said, it provides a ton of value.
If John finds it easy, you definitely know it's easy. So definitely go check it out. Go get some value out of it. So go do that. And guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you're not already subscribed, it would mean the world to John and I if you would do so. And if you got some value out of this and you are already subscribed, please send it to someone that you think would get a ton of value from it, or at least enjoy it or learn something. Scott, thank you so much for coming on, man. This was great.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Sean. Great to be here.